Another one in the books. The 2023 season is over, and it is once again the Kansas City Chiefs. Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce hoisting the Lombardi Trophy as the Chiefs beat the 49ers 25-22. How did it happen? Why did it happen? What can we learn from Super Bowl 58? Coming at you right now.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look into the NFL on the field and in the front office. With elite breakdowns, next-level analysis, and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at PD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks for making us your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Love all the everydayers out there. Make sure you are subscribed on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code, all lowercase, Locked On NFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Well, they did it again, Matt. The Kansas City Chiefs, and it took overtime. This was the latest Super Bowl victory of all time, Matt, as far as game clock goes. I think it was the second longest game by time, but when it comes to Super Bowls and halftimes and how long those games take, and this was a marathon. I don't care about time in the real world. I care about time on the clock. This one nearly went to double overtime, Matt. In the final minute of the first overtime, it was the Kansas City Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes finds Mecole Hardman, and those Kansas City Chiefs defeat the 49ers 25-22 to win Super Bowl 58.
Yeah, first half was a little slow, a little sloppy, and boy, things picked up in the second half, that's for sure. Congrats to the Chiefs. They are officially a dynasty. Aaron Schatz, formerly of Football Outsiders, now of FTN, DVOA guy. He was on last week or the week before, tweeted out that this was the most difficult run that any Super Bowl champion had in the playoffs in terms of the teams they had to face. And it was the top four offenses in the league that Kansas City ended up defeating in a row here, which is crazy as well. Tough run. So all the credit in the world. Go ahead. Yeah, please.
I want to get into that. So let's start there, because I think the first person, and we haven't mentioned him yet, that I think needs congratulating here. And I know we've talked about him a lot on this episode or on this podcast, but I think it's important to shine as much light as we can on Chiefs defensive coordinator Steve Spagnuolo. Yes. And laid out a great reason why. And I've actually got another one here from Aaron Schatz, if I can pull it up. So in the as far as back as DVOA goes, it goes back to 1981, and I think Aaron Schatz goes back and adds more years. So I think 1980 will be part of the DVOA history at some point in the next calendar year as well. But from when DVOA begins in 1981 to 2023, when you include regular season and playoff teams, the best offenses in that history of the NFL to lose a Super Bowl game were number 2, the 2023 San Francisco 49ers, number 3, the 2019 San Francisco 49ers. Both of those teams lost to the Kansas City Chiefs and Steve Spagnuolo, defensive coordinator of those. So those were 2 of the top 3 of all-time DVOA teams when you include playoff performances as well that lost the Super Bowl. Who was number 1? The 2007 New England Patriots, who lost to Steve Spagnuolo's New York Giants in the Super Bowl.
Wow.
And they were far and away the number 1 team by DVOA here. So the top 3 offenses from 1981 until now that lost the Super Bowl, all 3 of those teams lost to Steve Spagnuolo defenses.
Wow, that's unbelievable. And I guess let's start there. I mean, that side of the ball played very, very well. I thought Chris Jones was unbelievable. I mean, him and Bosa were my long shot MVPs, and both put up pretty strong games and pretty strong cases, but knew that was going to Mahomes when it was all said and done. They blitzed. I just read this morning. They blitzed the Niners about 50% of the snaps, and a lot of them were early run blitzes, things of that nature. And both teams were obviously very dedicated to taking the run away and tackling after the catch. And I thought both teams tackled quite well. Both teams pressured the quarterbacks quite well. Both teams eliminated the run quite well. And one of the keys, I mean, the Niners just never made them pay for blitzing. Never hit that big play over the top. Live by the blitz, die by the blitz, and they didn't die by the blitz at all.
Yeah, and I think credit also goes to the secondary, the Chiefs secondary. They did a great job against the 49ers receivers to allow Steve Spagnuolo to do that up front and send extra players. And there were a couple plays that great play by McDuffie on a deep ball to Deebo Samuel in the end zone. There was another one that the 49ers did have open. I think that was to Deebo as well, that Purdy missed, but he had pressure. Didn't have a lot of time to stand in and get all his cleats in the ground and make some of those throws. So I thought that was fantastic by the Chiefs defense. They played great in this game, and they were getting crushed up front. I think to tell the story of this game, and really my biggest takeaway, as soon as the game ended, and after potting about it and sleeping on it and coming back to do another podcast about it, I feel even stronger about this. And Patrick Mahomes was great, especially late, and deserves all the credit in the world. But I think it's too lazy and too simplistic to say, Patrick Mahomes is the greatest quarterback, and that's why the Chiefs won. That doesn't tell the story. I think you have to go all the way back to the first drive of the football game when the 49ers were wrecking the Chiefs up front. The 49ers won the battle in the trenches in this, and it's rare.
Oh, yeah.
You won the battle in the trenches. Turnovers were even 2-2, and you still lose the football game. This was Mike Tyson in the first round of a heavyweight fight. When he hits his opponent with the left hook and their knees buckle a little bit, and it's like, this one might be over early. That's what the 49ers were doing, but they missed on that left hook when Christian McCaffrey fumbled the ball. And then the next drive, the 49ers come back, 3 and out quick. Just the defensive line was great for the 49ers. And they were just dominating up front. And so what happens? Second drive, 49ers come back. Yep, we're still killing you. We're crushing you up front. We're going to roll down the field one more time. We screwed up the first time. We'll score this time instead. What happens? False start, Trent Williams, holding Trent Williams. All of a sudden, no points again. So what do you do with the 49ers? You go back to the drawing board and say, we got to replace Christian McCaffrey and Trent Williams. They're not good enough to win a Super Bowl, right?
Right.
That was the only thing that went wrong was the 2 best players on the team. And the 49ers, when they were up 10, should have been up 20. When it was a tie game at the end of the first quarter, should have been up 10, should have been up 14, 6 points minimum, right? So that, to me, is where the game was lost, a muffed punt. The 49ers
special teams too.
Yeah. The missed extra point, at least make the at the end of regulation, the Chiefs would have to go down and score a touchdown. A field goal wouldn't have gotten them to overtime. So before you even get to overtime and Patrick Mahomes winning it, and I loved the call. Andy Reid is so great at those red zone play designs, getting Mecole Hardman kind of working in motion, but then coming right back. And it was just an easy pitch and catch there for Mahomes to Mecole Hardman to win it in overtime. Before it got to any of that, that's where this game was won and lost. It was the 49ers didn't do enough to really put the pressure and just about have a first round knockout against the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, 100%. I think you nailed it. I mean, the Niners D-line, I thought, was utterly dominant for the majority of the game. And then eventually, D-lines wear out near the end is kind of what happens. But you mentioned some of the special team stuff. And any dynasty, Steelers, Patriots, whatever, Niners in the 80s, you have to get some bounces, the tuck rule or, and like the biggest play of the game, the ball
Helmet
hits
catch.
off the, yeah, exactly. And sometimes it goes the other way. I mean, D Ford lines up in the neutral zone. Maybe this is even a longer dynasty, so there's all these tiny little inches, and the biggest play of the game without question. And you kind of alluded to this was the punt that hits off the blocker for the Niners foot. That isn't, that's not his job to be fielding the punt.
Yeah.
And then poor Ray McLeod notices that, tries to save the day, and that's almost an impossible job with a bouncing football. And you give Mahomes the ball on the 12-yard line or whatever it was,
You mentioned the dynasty. First back-to-back champion we've had in 20 years.
Crazy.
3 Super Bowls in 5 seasons now for the Kansas City Chiefs. If it was kind of undecided, this one seals like the true dynastic run, right? Can we agree that Chiefs dynasty is officially on and continuing forward?
Oh, I think so. Yeah. And we'll talk about a lot of offseason stuff with all these teams, but sure sounds like Kelsey's coming back. I mean, sure sounds like Reed's coming back. Why would Spagnuolo leave? I mean, yeah, there could be some roster tweaks, but the quarterback's coming back. And I know you said the game did not just come down to Michael Jordan took the thing over and scored 100 points. I mean, but he was awfully good at the end.
I mean, the opportunity to get that door open. He kicked it open.
Yeah.
Shouldn't have done that. Now,
right. Still breathing, right.
Absolutely. All right. Next, we got to talk more about overtime and huge decisions in Super Bowl 58. Did it cost the 49ers the Super Bowl? Did it cost the 49ers the Super Bowl? And what to do next for the 49ers to get back here? And Kyle Shanahan is getting compared to Marv Levy. Let's get into that conversation next. Today's episode of Peacock Williamson is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 3 million members. The easiest and most exciting way to play DFS is just you against the numbers at Prize Picks. You pick more or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and that's it. Watch those winnings roll in. We're talking about 100 times your money. You can turn $10 into $1,000 now at Prize Picks because it's demon time at Prize Picks. You can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. Demons and goblins are the newest and most exciting way to play at Prize Picks. Squares marked with red demons or green goblins get you different payouts. You can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 of those correct picks. So get over to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL right now or download the app and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that is prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. So rewinding to late Sunday night after the game, for those who don't know, I also host Locked On 49ers. So we're going live, and it was, it was like, were we going to party all night, or was this going to be a somber event? And it turned out that the 49ers did not win, and that's the shape that the podcast took. So we're trying to figure out what happened, and we're talking about the game, breaking it down. Podcast ends, and I start to see a lot of interviews post game talking about the overtime rules and was it the decision?
Yeah.
And it never even crossed my mind, Matt, that you wouldn't take the kickoff to start overtime. And it passed me by. It sounds like it might have passed you by talking before the episode. And a lot of 49ers fans and a lot of 49ers that are paid by the organization didn't know the rules or weren't sure about the rules in overtime. And that's fascinating to me because it's the first time we've needed to know about those rules because it changed, and it only is a playoff rule, not a regular season rule, that even if you go down and score a touchdown, the team that receives the overtime kickoff, the other team still has a chance with the hammer to come back and score again. And according to Andy Reid, they did not want the ball first in overtime. They wanted it second because even if they did have to go down and score a touchdown, their plan all along was it was still going to end there. And the other team wouldn't have a third chance in overtime because they were going to go for 2 if it came to that. Turns out all they needed was a touchdown because the 49ers opening overtime drive ended in a field goal.
Interesting, because my son and I are watching this game live, and we're into it, obviously, and it's, overtime. Time is trucking along. And the thing that I didn't know, he asked me, he's like, is what happens when time runs out in the 5th quarter? I'm like, I'm not sure. But I remember at the coin flip. Yeah. I mean, that's never happened before. I'm like, there's no way. It must keep going, but I don't know. But I do remember when the ref flipped the coin in overtime, he said, this is a brand new game. And I was like, oh, they don't usually say that at the overtime flip. Like he phrased it a little bit differently. I'm like, there's no way that they're going to make this end at the 15-minute mark in the 5th quarter. That was where I was uncertain. And then they finally kind of talked about it when it came down to that, like, oh, this will keep going. I'm like, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, just a new quarter. And here's another wrinkle to this. So I've seen this question asked, if it went to another overtime, second overtime, does the 2 possession rule count again? And it doesn't. It would have then just been over sudden death, no matter what. So
yeah. Okay,
at
I'm glad you mentioned
that point, if it was
because
tied, sudden death, whoever scores anything wins.
yes. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm super smart because I'm not, but I remember 3 or 4 weeks ago, I kind of went on a rant about this in one of our conversations on Monday, saying the smart move in that particular game, and I remember which one it was to win the coin flip and kick off. And Belichick did that once way back when and got crushed for it against Peyton Manning, because I think when you play an elite quarterback, you just don't want to give them that advantage of, wow, 3rd down and 2 could be a run because we know we're going for it on 4th. Like all the decisions are made for you. Now, I don't know that it's right or wrong, and I'm certainly not blaming Shanahan. I think that's crazy. And I do think there is value to we want the football first if there's a 3rd possession. But it was a huge advantage for the Chiefs knowing I can settle for a field goal, but a touchdown wins it for me. Or if I'm deep in my own end, I'm going for it on 4th. You never have the punt thing on the table, so it's definitely an advantage.
I think the overriding factor for me in all of this is that I love the rule because I think it makes it a lot closer to 50-50, which is the goal of the whole thing, is to make it even and fair. And I do think the new rule does that. And, maybe with more data, with this happening more times, then we'll have a better answer, a definitive answer. But it's not like the 49ers didn't know they wanted the ball, because their thinking was they want the ball. They want it again if it's still tied to win it in sudden death. Because so if the Chiefs kick a field goal, Niners get the ball back, field goal then wins it, anything wins it. So that's in favor of the team that receives the opening kickoff. But when I run through it in my head now and hearing Andy Reid talk about it, and I just love the the confidence of well, it doesn't matter, we're going to go for 2 anyway, so they would never get that next extra chance. And I kind of like that idea as well. And Andy Reid, obviously, that was his go for 2 play that he ended the game on. If they score in a different fashion and it was tied, and they were down 1 and they were going to go for 2 in overtime to win it, that probably was their number 1, close goal line, go for 2, win it play. So that's probably what we saw. And obviously that would have worked, and the Chiefs still would have won the Super Bowl if that was their 2-point play, if they'd have gone down and scored in a different fashion. But the psychology of it is where I think I would lean toward kicking off. And it's that the team with the ball first is much more likely to say, okay, cool, let's just make sure we get 3 points here.
Yeah.
And I think
even punt if it's 4th and 12 in your own end, if something is terrible.
And I think if you are the other team, you would prefer to have your opponent have that mentality, and then you get the ball back knowing exactly what you need.
I don't blame Shanahan at all, but I do think so. It's funny. I was mentioning it. I was watching the game with my son, who's 17, and I mentioned to him, I'm like, you're probably too young, but the Niners kicking that overtime field goal for much of my life ends this game. He's like, oh, that would suck. I almost forget how bad it used to be. It's like you win the coin flip. All you got to do is get a couple yards and kick a field goal.
30 yards, kick a field goal, it's over, and the Niners would have been Super Bowl champions.
Yeah, that's a terrible way to end the game.
Not that. So, and actually, one more note here. This from Seth Walder, who is at Next Gen Stats, ESPN sports analytics guy.
Work, yeah.
He says, from an NFL analytics staffer this morning on first versus second possession in playoff overtime. And this was the quote from the analytics staffer at the NFL. Quote, anyone that is very confident that there is a clear option is probably wrong. So
okay, I can buy that. Yeah.
And that was the goal of all this. So of all the weird rule changes, and we argue about rules and things and how things should go, I think maybe the NFL got this one right. If it's so close that there's not really a right answer for overtime, that's how it should be.
Yeah, I love that just winning the coin flip doesn't give you a 90% chance of winning the game. Andy, maybe you don't kick off. Maybe you do, depending on the flow of the game. I think the opposing quarterback has a ton to do with it. I referenced it was a long time ago, but Belichick did it to Manning, I think, because he was afraid of Manning. I forget exactly how it went, but I mean, I should do some history homework on that. But I did think as soon as the Niners had, kicked the field goal and were kicking off, I'm like, oh, they're in huge trouble, because Mahomes knows he's got 4 downs to get 10 yards over and over and over with no clock constraints, or, like, that's not that much to ask from him. Or probably the other way around either. I mean, if it would have been the Niners that had 4 downs to get 10 yards, that's not much.
The thing I don't like about it is after the game, they were interviewing players, and Chris Jones and Justin Reed, I think, and some other Chiefs players was like, oh yeah, we went through this in camp. We knew what we were going to do in the playoffs. We went through the scenarios. Everyone knew. Kyle Juszczyk was asked after the game. He's like, I don't know what the right strategy is. I wasn't really even sure, So maybe the coaching staff knew, maybe the analytics department knew, but it didn't get trickled all the way down through the players in the organization. So that made me feel like, maybe they were a little underprepared for that decision, and maybe kicking is the right decision. But I think it's close enough that I don't blame Kyle Shanahan in overtime for that. I do think it's fair to ask the question if Shanahan was out coached here for a couple of other decisions throughout the game, Matt. And then we've got to answer the question, what's next for the San Francisco 49ers going forward and trying to get back here and get over that hump and win the Lombardi maybe next year? We'll talk about that next. This episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by DoorDash. And somehow they did it again. The Kansas City Chiefs pulled it off, but you got to hand it to them. That was one heck of a delivery from Patrick Mahomes to Mecole Hardman. And DoorDash can deliver to your door. DoorDash is the all-in-one app for everyday needs, not just football watch parties, from restaurants to groceries, flowers, and gifts. So next time you're running low on dinner ideas, pet supplies, maybe just running low on time, you can get so much more than you realize delivered with DoorDash. Whatever watch party, anything watch party you've got coming up, get it delivered with DoorDash. Get dinner for tonight, groceries for the week, consolation prize for your sad 49ers friends, maybe, all on DoorDash. DoorDash, your door to more. Head to the DoorDash app right now and get everything you need delivered. So I do think, and I felt this way after the Super Bowl 4 years ago, I think Reid and Spagnuolo got over on Shanahan. And if you're handing out wins and losses, obviously the Chiefs won the game. I do think Shanahan got out coached, not in a let's fire Kyle Shanahan, he can't win the big one, because he's getting called Marv Levy. But at a certain point, you look at the scoreboard and it's like, well, that's kind of what's happening. So you got to get over that hump and win one, or that's what the history books are going to write about you. And being compared to a great coach like Marv Levy isn't a bad thing. It's just that the first thing you think of is those Buffalo Bills teams in the early 90s that kept going to the Super Bowl but kept losing. And right now, that's what the scoreboard says about Kyle Shanahan. I didn't like his decision to not try to call timeouts earlier to get the ball back at the end of the first half.
Yeah, I agree.
And I didn't like at the beginning of the second half not running the ball at all and going 3 and out, boom, boom. It's when you really started to feel like, okay, the scoreboard is not in the place you want it to be for the 49ers right now with how well they've played. And it felt like they were winning the game by a lot more than they were. And you see the guy on the other sideline, and it's how we opened this podcast about having Patrick Mahomes on the other sideline. You can't continue to give him that many opportunities to go win the game. And in the end, he did that. So that's where I would say I would point to Shanahan, and Spagnuolo and Reid did a fantastic job there. But the overtime is not where I point at Kyle Shanahan.
I agree with all that. And a couple things on Peel there is Marv Levy's in the Hall of Fame. Bills fans sure would have liked the Super Bowl, but Marv Levy's in the Hall of Fame. And, that's not the worst guy to get compared to. I mean, you could get compared to Wayne Fonts or somebody that, never won a thing. I do think also this kind of correlates to Mahomes as well. Kind of one of the things we opened the show with, getting out schemed, out coached per se by Spags and Reid is also, not the most embarrassing thing in the world either. Right. This society kills the second place guy way too often in all walks of life. And, I'm sure a lot of Bills and Ravens, Lamar, Allen, these type of guys are watching that game last night. Like, man, what else can we do? Mahomes is going to win the Super Bowl every year as long as he wants to. And trust me, all my Steeler buddies we're going to go to the battle against that guy with Pickett and Tannehill, maybe. I'm like, I know it's not ideal. But to your point, too, I don't know that Mahomes, he's the best I've ever seen. but I don't know that he has this Superman superpower that he's unbeatable in these situations either. You know what I mean?
He threw an interception and Brock Purdy didn't. He threw another
Yeah.
arm punt that could have been intercepted, but Deshaun Gibson lost it in the lights. There was a couple of plays where receivers were looking up in the air like they didn't see it. I don't know if there's a weird lighting situation in that building or something, but I mean, it's not. And this was my big takeaway, and it's kind of my final thought. And again, it wraps around to my first thought with this game is Brock Purdy played pretty well in this game.
He did.
While clearly Patrick Mahomes is a better quarterback, and they put a lot on Patrick Mahomes to throw the ball 44 times and eventually go win the game, the difference between quarterbacks was not the difference in the Super Bowl being won. In the end, one quarterback made plays and won the game, clearly. But it was all the other things that I mentioned were in order in front of quarterback play, the reason the Chiefs won and the 49ers did not.
Okay, I just want to stick with Mahomes for a second because, as you mentioned, Bosa and company won their battle. And I thought Mahomes navigated that quite well. I mean, he was under pressured, a very high percentage of the time. And I think for most quarterbacks, it would have gone worse, you know what I mean, in terms of sacks, turnover-worthy plays, things like that, bad decisions. So he navigated that pretty well. He obviously was at his best when it mattered most, and there's no stats for that. And he's proven time and time again that clutch matters. I mean, as much as I like stats, clutch matters in the Super Bowl in the last drive of the game and those things. And he's as good as they've ever been. And he also made plays with his legs, that I think can't be discredited. He made 2 or 3 big runs as he always did, but it wasn't backbreaking as he often does. But you're right. I didn't think the difference in this game was one team had Mahomes and the rest of the league doesn't. I mean, with all due respect to him, again, I said he's the best player I've ever seen. But that to me was not the 100% determining factor. Like if I'm Buffalo, I'm going, boy, I will never beat him. I don't know you will or not, but I wouldn't give up the ship quite yet. It's not over yet.
Yeah. One thing's clear though, you cannot let him hang around because eventually he'll get you. He'll kill you.
Right.
And he did. So,
and even to your point, at one point you said the Niners could have been winning 20-0. It still wouldn't have been over. You know what I mean? Like,
right. It just would have taken
no doubt.
It would have been a more spectacular or disastrous finish of, okay, now I'm really going to force throws. Maybe I throw 3 interceptions, or maybe it's just a bigger comeback win for Patrick Mahomes. But it would have been more, it'd have been a more spectacular finish of let's
and
see,
and unlikely. And it's not like I would have been live betting the Chiefs if they were down 20-0. Right?
Right. yes. But you want them to have a bigger hill to climb.
Of course. Yeah, no doubt.
So now we turn the page. The 2023 season is over. We've got to fix a lot of football teams, Matt. The first team is the San Francisco 49ers. So we'll kind of tease that as we go into the week, start talking more about the teams that were knocked out of the playoffs. We'll talk about the Kansas City Chiefs, how they stay there. Of course, a lot of decisions to be made for teams that were not in the playoffs at all. It is now officially draft season for all 32 teams, Matt. We got the combine coming up in a couple of weeks. So all that. We'll start here with one big question for the 49ers, and we'll get more into that tomorrow and start talking about how these teams gear up for 2024 to try to make another run. As you watch this 49ers team, Matt, is there one thing that stood out to you? Because it's not like you're going to go get Patrick Mahomes in the offseason, right? Purdy played pretty darn good in the Super Bowl, I thought, and throughout the season in his first year as a starting quarterback in the NFL. You would think that maybe there could be some strides and he's even better next year, potentially. What's that one big thing for the 49ers?
I don't know if they have a one big thing. Like a lot of these teams, you could point to the Bills really need one more pass catcher or, like one big thing. Like if they were to, frankly, the Niners have been aggressive with their trades and trading future first round picks and things like that. I don't know that I'd be in that market if I were them I'm going to trade all my picks to go get a right tackle or a corner or whatever. I think you keep the pace. And you're happy that you finally have some early picks and you can get some cheap guys that might be Trent Williams replacement or kind of the Niners model, draft a bunch of defensive backs and, see who hits in that regard. But I don't think you need to change the direction the ship's going at all.
It's tough because the 49ers finally have a first round pick. They hadn't had a first round pick for 3 years because of the Trey Lance maneuvering.
And the McCaffrey trade, and
Right. Well, yeah, exactly. And that was,
high picks.
McCaffrey was a second, third, fourth, and fifth round picks. So that's a lot of
Yeah.
picks. And they had all these extra comp thirds that has helped them out. And two of them on display in this Super Bowl, actually, 2 rookie third rounders, and Jake Moody with the missed extra point, but did for a very short time until Butker hit one longer, had the longest field goal in Super Bowl history. The 2 longest field goals in Super Bowl history were in this game, Matt.
Yeah, that's crazy too.
And Jair Brown played a nice little game at safety for the 49ers third round pick. But they have to continue. Here's where we'll end. And this is the question we'll have to start answering in future weeks when you're talking about the San Francisco 49ers. Do they go even heavier all in to try to win one now, or do they try to elongate this window? And I think that's the big question. We'll try to answer that tomorrow. We'll talk about some of the other ousted teams, biggest questions for the Kansas City Chiefs, and of course, many decisions to be made for those teams selecting at the top of the NFL draft. A lot of them have new coaches and potentially new quarterbacks coming in. All that and more coming up as we continue every day throughout the offseason. We do not stop here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts. Matt and I back tomorrow. Peacock and Williamson.